from your slumber. Arise, ye prisoners of want. That's right. For reason in revolt now thunder. Chains of hatred, greed, and fear. Ha ha! Away with all your superstitions. Serve our masses. Arise, arise. We'll change henceforth the old tradition and spurn the dust to win the prize. So comrades, come on and rally. Then the last fight, let us face.
About this time last week, I was in the center of Prague, and I was marching around in support of the Kurdish people. Some of you may know that the Turkish government has declared that the PKK and the Rojava Kurds, they've described them as terrorists. And they've taken military action against the Kurdish people, and there have been civilian casualties. And so I wanted to lend my voice to the cause of the Kurdish people. So we marched around the center of Prague, and I think it would be generous if we said there was 100 people there. So the question arises, what can I do as an expat living in Prague to support the Kurdish people? And the larger question is, how can internationalism become a political practice? Now, I grew up in a small sect, a small group, which was committed to changing the world. It was argumentative, and there were disputes over the meaning of texts, the wording of particular pronouncements, as it were, and how these could be put into practice. I grew up as a Christian. As a TOK teacher at ECP, I recognize that many students see religion, and in particular Christianity, in a particularly dim light. For many ECP students, a Christian is somebody who struggles with the incompatibility of science and everyday life. A Christian who's somebody who is guided not by rationality or reason, but by emotions and faith. My experience is really quite different. My experience is of a reasoned argument based upon principles and put into day-to-day practice. And I would say that my base understanding of internationalism comes from this Christian upbringing. And so I believe there is such a thing as Christian internationalism. And there are a number of principles in which that's based. And so what I want to do is take a look at a number of selections from the Bible and to see what sort of principles the Christian internationalism might embody. And so the first example we'll take in here is from Proverbs. And it reads, for those with harder reading, rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. I'm going to be bold and say that is a commitment to equality. Second extract is from Hebrews, and you've got to remember that it was written a while ago. Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Now the key word there is all. It's a claim to universality. There's no picking and choosing. It is living with all people together. Now this, I have to say, is my favorite, because it suggests not just that there are principles, but there are ways in which you can put these principles into practice. And so from Leviticus, reads as follows: when a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself. And so, if there is a politician in this country, elsewhere, who says, Muslims don't belong in this country because we're essentially a Christian country and we don't want to lose our Christian heritage, our Christian culture, remind them of this, because a Christian culture would, what's the phrase? Treat them as your native born. And so I've been looking at these principles. I was brought up under these principles. And to me, internationalism is about equality, it's about universality, and it's about commonality. And it's also a plan for action. And that's why you will find Christians in campaigns for peace, campaigns against nuclear weapons, and in Christian Aid, which is a charity which promotes development and the eradication of poverty. And so these are my foundations. But this is a personal story. There is a very short leap for me from the Scottish Baptist Church to the International Marxist group in the late 1980s. And so my Christian internationalism becomes meshed with a socialist internationalism. Now, the Socialist International was founded in 1889 with the idea that workers' groups or workers' organizations would cross borders, work together against oppression and work towards social justice. And in 1907, there was a congress in Stuttgart, and this was their resolution. And it's an organization of workers, and they want to stop war. If a war threatens to break out, it is the duty of the working classes and their parliamentary representatives in the countries involved to exert every effort in order to prevent the outbreak of war by the means they consider most effective. Yes, it's ambitious, but the exciting part about this is this is not the United Nations. This is non-state actors, non-governmental organizations, workers' groups, trade unions, reaching across borders to try and stop war. I think that's exciting. Right, okay. So you've got the Socialist International, and they're debating about what to do internationally. But within this organization, there are two people who, they don't get on, really. So there's a dispute between, hopefully everyone recognizes this chap on the right. Audience response. Is Lenin, and then we have Rosa Luxemburg on the right-hand side. And they were debating just before the First World War about what to do about nationalities. Lenin's view was that national groups, remember he lives in the Russian Empire, the Russian Empire is made up of all these different nationalities, and he is supporting the right of nationalities for self-determination, which sounds a very good thing, because he thinks that if, for example, the Poles, to get their independence, it would shake the foundations of the Russian Empire. And so tactically, he thinks it's a good thing to do. And so in 1914, this is what he says. He thinks it's a good thing to do, support nationalities. The bourgeois nationalism of any oppressed nation has a general democratic content that is directed against the oppression, and it is this content which we unconditionally support. So I looked around in vain, but Lenin would have been on that march last week, because he was supporting the Kurds against the oppressive nations of the Turkish army. Rosa Luxemburg is one of my heroines, and that's why her picture is in the program rather than me. She's one of my heroines because she's Jewish, surrounded by non-Jews. She's Polish, surrounded by Germans. She is short, surrounded by tall people. And she's a woman. But she is an intellectual, and she's a fighter, and she's a leader at the time when women weren't meant to fulfill those roles. And in her argument with Lenin, she takes a different view. She believes that the Russian ruling class and the Polish ruling class really have the same sort of interests. And so therefore, the Polish working class and the Russian working class should unite in order to overthrow their oppressors. Now, whether you think they're oppressed or not is here and there, but her tactic was to cross borders. Her tactic was to meet other people. Her tactic was to unite together regardless of nationality. And again, once again, this is what I feel is the spirit of internationalism. So what she wanted was that capitalists then will be open to the possibility of a class alliance between the Polish and Russian working class. This is a talk about influences and nothing else. And so once again, we have two individuals here, and hopefully people recognize the gentleman on my right. Thank God for that. You can edit out the swear words. Okay, so this is George Orwell. We'll get onto him in a minute. But this George Orwell, and this is Edward Palmer Thompson, E.P. Thompson. He's an English historian. He was active in the 60s and the 70s. And the question is, what do they have in common? They have a number of things in common. They're both fantastic writers. I think between them, I don't think they've written a bad sentence. And so their inspiration in that sense as well. But they were both highly political. George Orwell was always to the left of the Labour Party. The E.P. Thompson was a renegade Marxist. But they were both socialist humanists. Now, I'm going to presume that everybody knows what socialism is, and I'm going to focus on what humanism is. And is that quite nice? He's a socialist, but his humanism means that his politics are based upon human relationships. That we can create a political practice which is about bonding with other people, working with other people, but also interacting with people. And so this is Orwell talking at the end of 1984, and he says, what matters were individual relationships, and a completely helpless gesture, an embrace, a tear, a word spoken to a dying man could have a value in itself. The proles, it suddenly occurred to him, had remained in this condition. They were not loyal to a party or a country or an idea. They were loyal to each other. So this is, in a couple of sentences, is to see how Orwell built his politics based on relationships. On the other hand, E.P. Thompson is a much more serious man. And he wrote the big book, which was Making English Working Class in 1963. And it was about what is class. Class is something we experience. Class is something that we do, not some label that is put upon us by some materialist philosopher. And so in his preface to this book, he writes the following. By class, I understand a historical phenomena unifying a number of disparate and seemingly unconnected events, both in the raw material of experience and consciousness. I emphasize that it is a historical phenomenon. I do not see class as a structure or even as a category. So it's not something you're put upon you, but it's something which you do. It's something which is in fact happens and can be seen to have happened in human relationships. And so where I'm coming from in talking about my influences is that internationalism is based upon equality, commonality, universality. But in terms of a political practice, I see socialist humanism as building relationships with people and developing ideas through those relationships. This is the anti-humanism. So, if humanism is based upon particular qualities, particular values, and particular practices, this is the anti-humanism. What is there about fascism which is nasty here? But also, what can we do to fight fascism? I'm presuming that many people think it's a bad idea. While we say equality, fascism is about hierarchy and elitism. Remember the first all men? Well, fascists wouldn't be keen about that. They would be thinking that there are hierarchies. There's a leader, and there are soldiers, and there are followers, and there are women. Well, we see universalism. They call for a racial nationalism, often based upon a particular definition of somebody's race or somebody's ethnicity. Well, we say cooperation, they want conflict. I think cooperation is a good thing, working together and coming to a collective idea of what to do. Well, we are reasonable, they're anti-rational and emotional. This sounds a bit, you can imagine these crying Nazis. What I mean by that is, I'm rational in the sense that I look at information and I take decisions based upon that information. If I was a Nazi, I wouldn't have to go through all that bother. I would take a gut response, gut reaction response to things. And so I'm emotional to that degree. While we promote peace, they want violence. So, if I've got this right, and I'm running out of time, if I've got this right, then by wandering through my different influences, I should have come to some sort of conclusion. I believe internationalism is based upon values such as equality, such as commonality, such as universality. And I believe a political practice should be based upon interaction with other people and developing relationships like that. So, who are my brothers and sisters in Christ? Who are my comrades in the struggle against oppression? They are the Polish woman who's denied access to abortion care. They are the Iranian woman who is arrested for removing her headscarf. They are the Muslim woman who has her hijab ripped from her head whilst traveling on a bus in London. They are the 900 Rohingya refugees forced at gunpoint to leave their homes. They are the 328 transsexual women who have been murdered up to the 20th of November 2017. They are the child who suffers hate speech as she walks home from school. They are the Toyota workers demanding union recognition in South Africa. They are the Rojava Kurds who are marching around the center of Prague trying to stop the bombs falling on them. Internationalism is about the common humanity of the person sitting next to you. Internationalism starts here, and internationalism starts now. Didn't get the music.